In the beginning, there were no enemies, only brothers. They spoke the same tongue, worshipped the same gods, and called the same land home. But when power, pride, and pain crept into their hearts, a line was drawn, and blood was spilled on sacred soil. The land of Ile-Ife, cradle of the Yoruba people. The town of Modakeke, born of exile and survival. Two names bound by heritage, divided by history. What began as refuge became rivalry. What began as welcome ended in war. And for over a century, brother turned against brother, not because they were different, but because they had forgotten they were the same. This is not just a story of violence. It is a story of identity. A story of land, loyalty, loss, and legacy. This is the story of the Ifẹ and Modákẹ conflict. And it begins not with a war cry, but with a whisper from the ancestors. Discover the powerful and emotional true story behind one of Nigeria's longest and most devastating communal conflicts, the Ifẹ and Modákẹ War. In this documentary video, History of Ancestors dives deep into the historical roots of the Ifẹ and Modákẹ crisis, tracing it from its 19th century beginnings to its violent peaks in the 1990s and the fragile peace that holds today. In this video, you will learn the origin of the Ifẹ and Modákẹ conflict in Yorubaland, the role of land ownership, identity, and political autonomy, how colonial and post-independence governments influenced the war. The 7 major wars fought between the two communities, powerful peace-building efforts, and the role of traditional rulers. The legacy of division and the hope for unity. Whether you're a lover of African history, Yoruba heritage, or global conflict resolution, this episode will open your eyes to a true story of brotherhood turned bitter and the long journey back to healing. The Ifẹ and Modákẹ conflict is a long-standing intra-ethnic feud between two Yoruba communities in present-day Osun State, southwestern Nigeria. It is often cited as one of the oldest ongoing communal conflicts in the country, dating back to the mid-19th century. The adversaries are the people of Ile-Ife, venerated in Yoruba tradition as the ancestral homeland, and the people of Modakeke, a town originally founded by refugees from the collapsing Oyo Empire. Despite sharing the same Yoruba ethnic heritage and tracing their origin to a common progenitor, the deity King Oduduwa, the Ife, often regarded as indigenous landowners, and the Modakeke, perceived as settlers or tenants, have clashed repeatedly over issues of land rights, political autonomy, and cultural identity. Over the decades, this conflict has led to periodic eruptions of violence, claiming thousands of lives and disrupting the social and economic fabric of the region. The roots of the Ifẹ and Modákẹ conflict can be traced to historic events in the early 19th century. Following the collapse of the old Oyo Empire in the 1830s, partly due to the Fulani jihad incursions from the north, waves of Oyo Yoruba refugees fled southwards. Many of these displaced people converged on Ile-Ife, likely drawn by its reputation as the Orisun, cradle of the Yoruba nation. The then Uni of Ife, the paramount king of Ile-Ife, welcomed the refugees and permitted them to settle on Ife land. Initially, relations were cordial. The newcomers, who would later be known as Modakeke, proved valuable allies in warfare and farm labor. even fighting alongside the Ifẹ in conflicts such as the 1820s Owu War and battles against neighboring Ijesha invaders. However, tensions emerged as the identity and status of the refugee community evolved. The Ifẹ people viewed themselves as hosts and landlords, while the Oyo immigrants were expected to remain loyal clients on Ife soil. Resentment grew on both sides. A turning point came in 1835 when a power struggle in the city of Ibadan, then a burgeoning Yoruba power center, led to a confrontation between an Ifẹ leader and Oyo elements. Chief Okunade, the Maye of Ifẹ, an Ifẹ warlord who had risen to prominence in Ibadan, was ousted and killed by the Oyo faction in Ibadan. News of this betrayal enraged the Ife authorities, who in revenge vented their anger on the Oyo refugees living in Ile-Ife. The Ife began to persecute the settler community. Some refugees were reportedly sold into slavery or expelled, marking the first outbreak of open hostilities between Ife and the nascent Modakeke group. To contain the unrest, the Uni of Ife decided to segregate the feuding communities. In the late 1830s, he ordered the remaining Oyo refugees to relocate out of central Ile-Ife and established a separate settlement for them just outside the city. This new town was named Modakeke. According to tradition, the name comes from the cry of storks, birds said to be plentiful at the site, that sounded like Modakeke. The leader of the resettled community was given the title Ogunsua of Modakeke, signifying a recognized chieftaincy for the Oyo Yoruba settlers under Ife's suzerainty. Despite this attempt at physical separation, the underlying grievances remained. Over time, three core issues fueled the conflict. First, land ownership and tribute, Isakole. Since Modakeke was founded on Ile-Ife's land, Ife elites claimed landlord rights over the territory. They imposed an agricultural tribute or rent known as Isakole on Modakeke farmers. This arrangement bred resentment, especially as Modakeke farmers prospered. Tensions climaxed after World War II, when cocoa production, a cash crop, boomed. Ife landowners demanded higher rents, which Modakeke cultivators deemed extortionate. What had been a token tribute became a bitter point of contention, with Modakeke refusing to continue paying for the soil under their feet, and Ife insisting on their historic landlord prerogatives. Secondly, ethnic identity and indigenous settler divide. Although both groups are ethnically Yoruba, sub-ethnic identities harden the divide. The Ifẹ pride themselves as the original owners of Ile-Ife, the sacred Yoruba birthplace, whereas the Modakeke trace their lineage to the Oyo kingdom and developed a distinct community identity. The Ifẹ came to regard Modakeke people as strangers or tenants in perpetuity, not true indigenous people of the area. This created a social hierarchy that the Modakeke continuously challenged, asserting that they deserved equal recognition and rights since they had lived in the area for generations. And lastly, local autonomy and political representation. The Modakeke community's quest for internal self-determination became a flashpoint in the 20th century. They sought administrative autonomy, for example, their own local government or separate representation, to escape what they perceived as domination by Ile-Ife. Conversely, if leaders feared that granting Modakeke political independence, such as a new local council, would undermine Ile-Ife's authority and traditional hegemony in the area. Disputes over the creation of local government units and the siting of administrative headquarters played a direct role in sparking late 20th century violence, as detailed later. In sum, the conflict's causes are a complex mix of historical grudges, economic competition, and power struggle. What began as a quarrel between hosts and settlers in the 1800s evolved into a protracted feud, partly economic and partly political, entwined with questions of group identity, land tenure, and rights within the Yoruba socio-cultural framework. Over time, these issues became deeply entrenched, and the original cause of conflict faded behind cycles of retaliation and distrust, making the feud self-perpetuating. Over the past 170-plus years, the Ifẹ and Modákẹ rivalry has flared into violence multiple times. Historians commonly identify 7 major episodes of open conflict, interspersed with uneasy lulls. The first conflict between Ifẹ and Modakeke began during the period from 1835 to 1849, which marked the genesis of hostilities between the two communities. Tensions erupted after the killing of the Ifẹ warlord Okunade by Oyo forces in 1835. In response, the leadership of Ile-Ife turned against the Oyo refugees living among them. Throughout the 1840s, tensions simmered, marked by sporadic skirmishes and the persecution of Modakeke settlers. By 1849, these frictions had escalated into armed clashes, officially marking the First Ifẹ and Modákẹ War. Although specific casualty records from this period have been lost to history, the events of these years firmly entrenched a pattern of animosity and violence that would persist for generations. The second major conflict, spanning 1882 to 1909, occurred during the broader Yoruba civil wars, particularly the Kiriji Ekiti Parapo War, 1877-1893. After decades of relative peace, Ifẹ and Modakeke ended up on opposing sides of this widespread internal struggle. While Modakeke maintained allegiance to Ibadan, Ifẹ eventually shifted support to Ibadan's enemies, thereby turning the two neighbors into adversaries. In 1892, Modakeke fighters launched a devastating assault on Ile-Ife, reportedly burning the sacred city to the ground. Many Ifẹ inhabitants were killed or enslaved, and survivors fled to surrounding villages. The war continued until the Treaty of 1886, brokered by the British, which formally ended the Yoruba Civil War. Crucially, the treaty mandated the eviction of Modakeke from Ile-Ife territory to ensure lasting peace. However, the colonial government initially failed to adequately protect the Modakeke from retaliatory attacks, and continued violence forced the entire population to migrate out in March 1909. For more than a decade after that, Modakeke effectively ceased to exist as a town. Its people dispersed throughout Yorubaland. Only in 1922 did colonial authorities allow Modakeke families to return and rebuild their community under more stable conditions. In the years 1946 to 1949, shortly after the end of World War II, unrest once again gripped the region. By then, Modakeke had been resettled for over 20 years, and disputes over Isakole, land rent, became a major flashpoint. The economic boost from the cocoa boom in the late 1940s made farmland more valuable, prompting EF landlords to sharply increase the rents paid by Modakeke tenant farmers. The Modakeke community viewed these hikes as exploitative and resisted them. The resistance led to violent protests, arson, and deadly clashes. Though historical records are sparse, both sides suffered casualties during these confrontations. This post-war conflict demonstrated how economic grievances, left unaddressed, could easily reignite deep-rooted ethnic and communal tensions. The situation worsened further in 1981 with the outbreak of what became known as the local government riots. Following Nigeria's return to civilian rule in 1979, new political opportunities and rivalries emerged. The Modakeke community renewed their long-standing demand for a separate local government area distinct from the Ifẹ-dominated system. During the Second Republic, 1979-1983, the ruling NPN party at the federal level promised to grant Modakeke their own local government in exchange for electoral support, while the opposition UPN, dominant in the Yoruba region, aligned itself with Ifẹ interests. The flashpoint came in April 1981 when the UPN-controlled Oyo State government announced a reorganization that placed Modakeke under the new Oranmiyan local government area, which was controlled by Ifẹ. This decision sparked intense anger in Modakeke, where people saw it as a betrayal. Violence broke out almost immediately, with mobs from both sides engaging in deadly clashes. Many people were killed and dozens of homes were burned in a matter of days before security forces intervened. Though not as bloody as earlier wars, this crisis was significant for being the first large-scale violence of the modern era stemming from unresolved governance issues. Another wave of violence followed in 1983 during Nigeria's tense general elections and the eventual collapse of the Second Republic. While the exact trigger of the 1983 unrest in Ifẹ and Modákẹ is less clearly documented, it is believed that the unfulfilled promise of a separate local council contributed to renewed agitation among Modakeke residents. Political rivalries inflamed existing resentments, leading to another round of clashes. Though this conflict was relatively short-lived, it reaffirmed how fragile the peace between both communities remained. Order was only restored after the military coup that brought General Muhammadu Buhari to power at the end of 1983, though the root causes of the conflict were left unresolved. Perhaps the most intense phase of the Ifẹ Modákẹ crisis occurred between 1997 and 1998 during what is often referred to as the 4-Year War. Under General Sani Abacha's military regime, the federal government undertook a widespread local government reform. In what seemed to be a concession to Modakeke's long-standing demands, a new Ifẹ East local government area was created in 1996-97, with its headquarters initially planned for Modakeke at Okedio. This decision gave Modakeke a symbolic and administrative victory, but it provoked fierce resistance from the Ifẹ elite, who insisted that the headquarters must be located within Ile-Ife. Yielding to pressure, the government reversed its decision in August 1997 and relocated the council headquarters to Oke-Ogbo in Ile-Ife. Modakeke saw this as a betrayal of their promised land and responded with rage. By late 1997, full-scale war erupted between militias from both sides. The violence continued through 1998 and early 1999, marked by massacres, reprisal killings, and widespread destruction of property, including hundreds of homes and vehicles. Thousands of residents were displaced, and what unfolded was effectively a low-intensity civil war at the local level that drew concern from both national and international observers. Despite the restoration of democratic governance in 1999 and the death of General Abacha, the violence did not immediately stop. In 2000, clashes continued as armed youth from both sides refused to disarm and mutual distrust persisted. Some of the worst episodes of bloodshed occurred between March and May 2000, even as the new civilian government worked to end the hostilities. It took sustained military crackdowns and intervention by Yoruba leaders to calm the situation. By the end of 2000, fighting had largely ceased. That year is widely considered the point at which the cycle of communal violence between Ifẹ and Modakeke finally came to an end, allowing peace efforts to begin in earnest. Throughout these phases, the Ifẹ-Modakeke conflict has been cyclical, with periods of tense peace erupting into violence whenever a triggering issue, land payments, government creation, etc., renews old resentments. The death toll over the entire history is difficult to calculate, but just the late 1990s war alone resulted in over 2,000 fatalities and countless injuries according to estimates. The conflict's longevity and intensity have made it a tragic fixture in Nigeria's history of communal strife. Over the years, many efforts have been made to restore peace and mend the deep divide between Ifẹ and Modakeke. These efforts have ranged from formal treaties to grassroots initiatives. One of the earliest peace attempts came in 1886 during the broader Yoruba Wars, when the British imposed a treaty that forced the Modakeke people to leave Ile-Ife. Though this halted direct conflict, it didn't resolve the deeper issues. It simply pushed them aside. Even when the Modakeke were allowed to return in 1922, they were kept in a separate settlement, reinforcing division rather than unity. Over time, government intervention became more structured. After the 1981 riots, the old Oyo state government launched an inquiry into the crisis, identifying land rent disputes as part of the problem, though its recommendations saw little follow-through. In the aftermath of the 1997-2000 crisis, President Olusegun Obasanjo set up a high-level peace committee led by Admiral Olabode George. Working with the Osun state government and consulting both communities, the committee made several key proposals. They recommended officially recognizing the Ife East Area Office at Modakeke to grant the town a degree of self-governance, suggested that Modakeke be called Modakeke Ife to symbolically link both towns while maintaining Modakeke's identity, and advised the deployment of police forces to flashpoints to deter future violence. Some of these suggestions were implemented. Modakeke was granted administrative autonomy under the area office structure, and the name Modakeke Ife began to appear in public records. Although the full police measures were not entirely realized, temporary deployments helped restore calm and reassured both sides during the transition period. Beyond government actions, traditional rulers also played their part. The Oni of Ife and the Ogunsua of Modakeke held joint events and made public declarations of peace, using cultural rituals like sharing kola nuts and prayers to emphasize unity. They reminded their people that both towns are descendants of Oduduwa and fratricidal conflict dishonors that shared ancestry. Community-led initiatives further strengthened peacebuilding. Local committees made up of youths, elders, and clergy worked to prevent small disputes from escalating, especially on farmlands where many conflicts had started. NGOs and scholars from institutions like Obafemi Awolowo University facilitated workshops on trauma healing and economic collaboration. Over time, these collective efforts, both official and informal, have helped shift perspectives, encouraging people in Ifẹ and Modákeke to see each other not as rivals, but as neighbors striving for a shared future. Thanks to the above efforts, the Ifẹ-Modakeke conflict has not seen a major violent recurrence since 2000. While not all recommendations were implemented and some grievances linger, the sustained peace process created a framework for coexistence. By addressing the core political issue, administrative autonomy through the area office, and affirming mutual respect via cultural reconciliation, a fragile but lasting peace has been achieved. The end of hostilities in this conflict is often cited as a success story in communal conflict management in Nigeria, showing the value of combining top-down intervention with bottom-up reconciliation. Today, more than 2 decades after the last major clashes, Ifẹ and Modakeke have gradually moved from violent conflict to a state of uneasy peace. The scars of the past are still visible in the ruins of buildings once set ablaze and in the cautious eyes of elders who remember the bloodshed. Yet, despite the lingering pain, the journey toward healing has seen remarkable progress. One of the most significant achievements is the creation of the Ifẹ East Area Office, known as Modakeke Ifẹ. This administrative structure granted Modakeke a level of local self-governance, with 3 electoral wards of its own, while still remaining under the larger Ifẹ jurisdiction. This delicate balance, offering autonomy without complete separation, helped satisfy Modakake's long-standing demands for recognition and reduce the friction that once sparked violence. Over the years, Modakeke natives have taken up roles in local governance and planning, no longer feeling subordinate to Ifẹ. This shift has brought political stability to the region. Culturally, both communities have taken steps to bridge the divide. The adoption of the name Modakeke Ifẹ represents more than just a label. It symbolizes a shared identity and a hope for unity. In recent years, joint cultural festivals, youth sports competitions, and inter-community visits have become more common. These events, though small, have allowed the younger generation to interact freely, breaking down old stereotypes. Intermarriage is no longer as forbidden as it once was, and daily life in schools, markets, and places of worship reflects a cautious but growing sense of normalcy. Many residents, especially the youth, are tired of conflict and now speak more of peace than of war. Still, this peace is not taken for granted. It is carefully guarded by community leaders, traditional rulers, and security agencies. The Uni of Ifẹ and the Ogunsua of Modakeke remain vocal in their commitment to maintaining harmony. Government authorities, especially in Osun State, continue to monitor the region closely. When minor incidents occur, such as the 2021 killing of farmers that briefly raised tensions, swift intervention and public appeals for calm have prevented escalation. Local peace committees remain active, addressing disputes before they spiral into crises. Yet underneath the calm, unresolved tensions persist. Older generations, shaped by years of distrust, still harbor suspicion. Occasional land disputes or thefts are sometimes interpreted through the lens of old rivalries. Social media, too, can quickly revive bitter narratives if left unchecked. While open warfare seems a thing of the past, the region still lives under what many call a negative peace. The absence of violence, but not yet the presence of true reconciliation. To move forward, both communities must confront lingering inequalities and continue the difficult conversations about justice, memory, and forgiveness. In the end, The Ifẹ Modákẹ conflict, once feared to be unending, has become a case study in how deeply rooted divisions can be transformed. Through a mix of traditional wisdom, political compromise, and community resilience, peace has been achieved. The history of this conflict serves as a warning and a lesson that identity-driven violence can endure for generations if left unresolved, but also that healing is possible when both leaders and citizens choose dialogue over division. Today, Ifẹ and Modakeke stand not just as neighbors, but as survivors. The hope is that as the years pass, peace will deepen, memories of conflict will fade, and future generations will inherit a story not of bloodshed, but of brotherhood. As of 2025, calm prevails, and across Nigeria, the Ifẹ Modákẹ story is often told not as a tale of tragedy, but as an example of how even the deepest wounds can be mended when there is the will to heal. As the dust of time settles over the sacred lands of Ifẹ and Modakeke, a silence remains. Not the silence of fear, but the silence of reflection. A silence where drums once roared in war. Now beat gently in peace. From bloodlines broken to bonds mended, this is not just a story of ancient grudges. It is a living testimony that even the deepest wounds can find healing when truth is faced and unity embraced. Because in the end, we are all children of the same ancestor. If this story moved you, if our history matters to you, then don't let the voices of the past fade into dust. Subscribe to History of Ancestors, where forgotten stories rise again. Let's walk the path of the past together.